Already there's over, how many, 300 people?
Yes.
Over 300 people have already shown an interest to be registered. Of course, they have to be Fijian citizens, which involves having a valid Fijian passport at the time of registration. New Zealand is being used more as a test run, and then of course we move on to Australia. We have some substantial number of Fijians living in UK, in the British Army, and also we have Fijians living on the west coast of North America. But the New Zealand one would be followed by Australia soon after that. As we said, the team will carry out registration for 8 days from the 23rd of October to the 31st of October. They'll leave Fiji on the 22nd of October. The cost of this is about $40,000. How much exactly? About $40,000 Fijian dollars. Which of course includes all the accommodation, transportation, etc. But of course it is worthwhile because quite a few Fijians live in New Zealand. Just on another note, we also had a meeting earlier, just at 1 o'clock this afternoon, with the development partners who are working with us in terms of resourcing the elections office. As you know, we have a big committee and we have a small committee too. The smaller committee is the working committee, which consists of representatives from Australia, New Zealand, EU and Papua New Guinea. The Papua New Guineans have already committed in writing that they will be giving us 25 million kina by March of next year, the end of the first quarter of next year, which is approximately 20 million Fijian dollars. There have been some rough estimates that have been worked out that the cost of holding the elections in one day and a credible and transparent elections would cost a little over 40 million Fijian dollars. At this stage, is some preliminary costings. We've also agreed in principle, as we've said that, and all of you know, that we had the EU, Commonwealth and New Zealand experts who put together a report in terms of doing the needs assessment and gap analysis. Now there needs to be a more detailed approach done in terms of logistics, actual planning, logistics, the HR and the specific areas. And we've agreed in principle to get 6 technical experts, 2 from New Zealand, 2 from Australia and 2 from EU. We'll be finalizing that on Monday. We meet again on Monday. So they should be on the ground, some of them should be on the ground by the middle or third week of October. Once that is done, and also at the same time we also would be getting some drafting experts to come in and start drafting the regulations, because our goal is that we need to have all the ducks lined up as far as getting all the information out to the public, the political parties by the end of the year, in terms of they knowing exactly what the rules and regulations are, in terms of counting, in terms of the reconciliation, in terms of advertising, and of course at the same time it would be most beneficial for other donors to know exactly what is required. For example, we need to know exactly how many ballot boxes will be required for that one day, how much indelible ink we need, right down to the nitty-gritty, how many pencils we need, how will all the logistics be arranged vis-a-vis the locations. We need to sort out all the locations for the polling stations. At this moment it is envisaged that we'll need to have at least 3,000 polling stations to ensure that we have elections conducted in one day. And that of course can be done. We need to develop some very specific and clear, transparent rules in terms of appointment of staff. In particular also, staff will be hired only for a very short period of time. And we're looking at more of the youth, the younger people, university students. So we'd like to carry out the training much earlier on in the piece, not 2 days before elections, but a few months before the elections are held. So we need to get all the groundwork done. I know some of you have been sending me questions regarding comments made by politicians on the elections office. Some of them have suddenly become experts overnight. And as I said to Rossi the other day, that and we've said continuously from the beginning, we don't want to politicize it. And I also urge the media not to fall for the trap too, because that's what you simply are doing. What you're doing is just because a politician says something, you then come to us for comments. This really does not require any comments, because in fact a lot of the comments are in fact misplaced. The point is that we need to take a apolitical approach to the elections office. Obviously our development partners have a lot of confidence in what is being done, and confidence in the system that has been set up under the Constitution. That is why they are working with us, and the fact that we are getting experts coming out and working with us is again a sign of the confidence in the processes, and we want to ensure that all the processes are laid out, logistics are laid out, the rules and regulations are laid out in a very apolitical and objective manner, to ensure that the actual political outcome is fair, credible and transparent. And that is very critical, and I think you need to understand there needs to be a delinking of those two processes. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
When will the electoral roll be ready? You've got more than 500,000 registered voters already. When that will come out? When will the first one come out and then updated as we go through?
Well, people can access that at the moment.
Yes.
Political parties can access that,
Yeah.
and I think some of them have accessed that. So political parties are allowed to come and access that, and they have done that. And in fact, people can go and check there. As we've said, people can go and check that. So that's available.
So just a clarification on Fijians who hold dual or multiple citizenships, will they be eligible to register to vote?
Yes, that's allowed. Yes, definitely. But you can't be a candidate for the elections if you hold dual citizenship or multiple citizenship. You must only be a Fijian. But to vote, you can vote, which is a generally accepted norm.
So people who are on permanent residence but still hold a blue passport?
Yeah, of course, Fijians. The citizenship is Fiji. They have citizenship of Fiji.
Doesn't matter they have permanent residence?
No. Doesn't matter even if they're New Zealand citizens, as long as they're still a Fijian citizen. Because the laws allow for dual citizenship now.
Is there any estimate figures to how many people would be eligible in New Zealand?
No, actually. Do you have any estimates? We don't have any estimates.
So you mentioned 300, over 300 people. Is it just from New Zealand who have submitted interest to?
Do you want to elaborate on that?
We have received expression of interest from Fijians worldwide, not only New Zealand,
So the over 300 is from?
Throughout the world.
throughout
Yes.
the world.
Yeah. So in that, I've got the form here. I don't know if you've seen that. So you submit your interest. This is the page on the web page. I suggest you go to it and have a look at it. Name, your address outside of Fiji, your postcode, suburb, passport number, etc. So that helps the elections office plan. So if for example there's a lot of people riding in from Papa Toi Toi in Auckland, they know that there's a lot of Fijians who are living there and who are eligible to be registered. So they make arrangements to go there.
Just the cost for elections, you're saying around about 40 million. PNG has said it will give about 20 million. The remaining 20 million, definitely other countries have said that they will also commit. You expected it to be funded through the donors, or government may have to pitch in at the same time?
Well, some of the donors have not necessarily given any figures or set sums. And we've also said to the donors, we don't necessarily want the money per se. They can, for example, one of the countries had offered at one stage to buy all the ballot boxes. So that is fine. But we have certain requirements that the ballot boxes must be UN compliant. So they must meet the best international standards. And so they'll say, okay, this is our contribution. For example, India has already offered indelible ink if we need ink. So that defrays the costs in terms of the overall cost that's there. And this is what these people will also be doing. The 6 will be coming over, that they'll also be planning, They may say that, we require 25 vehicles and this much oil or fuel costs, that we may need to hire 10 boats. I mean, it needs to be dealt with right now at that level. So we know exactly how much money is being spent. We don't want, like previous practices, suddenly say, we're running short of money, and people start putting their hand in the till. We don't want that. We want to know exactly how much money it will cost, because it's all taxpayers' money at the end of the day. And also it does ensure credibility with the donors, so they know exactly these are the costs. So if you have a credible proposal, they'll be willing to fund it, if they know that everything is being accounted for. So that's, like I said, that's the approximate cost at this stage. It may well be a bit more, it may well be slightly less. We don't know at this stage. But from the estimates that we put together, approximately $40 million.
The issue of observer missions, there have been suggestions made by some of the countries that they would like to send elections observer missions during the elections next year. Is the government ready for that? Has the government said anything on that?
Well, the government is very much focused on getting these fundamentals right, and I think that's more important at this stage. But as you know, that the Prime Minister in his visit to Papua New Guinea had also said the MSG was willing to send an observer group, which he had welcomed. But at this stage we are more focused on ensuring we get the basics right, and those sorts of things can be discussed later.
Would you allow them if they want, because UN and Commonwealth are already working with Fiji?
Like I said, that can be something discussed later. We'll be more focused on this at the moment. As you know, we've also advertised for the supervisor of elections. And having the discussions with the donor countries, they've also disseminated that quite widely. And I think our hits on the Facebook page has gone up predominantly after the supervisor of elections advertisement went out. So a lot more people are getting interested. From what we also have been told by the experts, that the supervisor of elections cadre is quite a small one, the real good ones. I'm not talking about the ones who become experts overnight. And so there's a lot of a buzz about it, there's a lot of excitement about it. So we hope that will ensure that we get a very, very good selection of candidates to choose from.
I think 12 months off, we're starting the registration for Fijians overseas. Does government have any plan yet on how the actual voting process will take place for Fijians who live overseas?
No, that's obviously, there are various ways of doing that, and that obviously will be something worked out. As you know, some countries, for example, have you actually go out and you vote, like in Australia, the recent Australian elections. They had Australians, for example, who were living in Hong Kong. They voted before the actual election date at the embassies, or certain areas they identified. That's one way of doing it. Some countries have postal ballots, which you actually post your vote. So that's something that needs to be worked out as to what's the best way and most efficient way, and indeed ensuring that there is no fraud. But they are the two key ways of doing that.
So what will happen to those Fijians who do not live in the areas where these teams will be visiting?
Well, we realistically cannot go to every single Fijian. If somebody's living right down, in some small town in New Zealand, we can't exactly go out to them. But we're hoping that it'll generate enough publicity that people might actually come over to Wellington. Wellington is not that far from South, and Christchurch. We'll see, if there's, for example, there's a certain level of flexibility built in. But we certainly cannot cover every single Fijian. But it's hoped that they will come over. In Australia, for example, our High Commission has already done some work. They've been to various rugby games and registered people, various other activities that have been held, as a Fijian community, and they've gone out and registered where people live. And this is why it's important to have the registration also open on weekends. As you know, most Fijians who go offshore work quite a lot, and sometimes 2 shifts, or husband and wife both are working. So we like to be open on weekends too, and perhaps on very late hours too.
Just got one question for Registrar of Election, political parties. Just the issue in relation to the declaration of assets and liabilities. Some of the political parties' representatives who had given in the information which was publicized, they did not give the source of income. Our party leader had just put $3 million as his income, but it's clearly stated in the decree they have to give the source of income, where they got that money from, and full details. Is that still being analyzed? Because that came out more than 2 months ago.
We are still analyzing the details submitted. We still welcome any comments from any members of the public who may have information about the particulars submitted, whether there should be less or more. And we will treat each response by member of the public when we analyze all the details submitted by all the parties.
The other issue is about the definition of a child, because any child that was over 18, they didn't give any details about their assets and liabilities. However, it's required under the decree. We have defined a child now. What is a child for these political parties, representatives, if they submit their assets and liabilities?
I think it's not prudent to probably comment on it because the registrar is going through his analysis. So let's get him to complete that. There are also some technical issues in terms of verifying some of the information, and there has been a need to ensure that, for example, institutions like banks give the information to be able to assist the registrar to verify those details, and we've had to make some amendments to ensure that institutions like banks actually comply with that. So I think it's not prudent to comment on that. Let him carry out that process.